Marcus Thompson had always been the kind of person who thought rules were meant for other people. At 28 years old, he worked as a social media influencer in London, making his living by creating viral content that often pushed boundaries. His followers loved him for his bold pranks and his willingness to do what others wouldn't dare. But Marcus had one fatal flaw that would soon change his life forever. He never knew when to stop. The summer of 2023 had been particularly good to Marcus. His YouTube channel had just hit 2 million subscribers, and brands were throwing money at him for sponsorship deals. He lived in a trendy apartment in Camden, drove a flashy sports car, and seemed to have the world at his feet. But success had made him reckless, and he was always looking for the next big stunt to keep his audience entertained. It was during a casual conversation with his best friend Jake at their local pub that the idea first came up. They were discussing Marcus's recent prank where he had pretended to be a street performer outside the London Eye, causing quite a scene when security tried to move him along. "You know what would be absolutely mental?" Jake said, taking a sip of his beer. "If someone actually tried to mess with those guards at Buckingham Palace. You know, the ones who aren't supposed to move or react to anything." Marcus's eyes lit up immediately. He had seen countless tourists trying to get reactions from the Queen's Guard over the years, but most attempts were harmless and boring. A few people would make faces, tell jokes, or wave their hands in front of the guards' faces. But Marcus was already thinking bigger. "I bet I could make one of them break," Marcus said confidently. "Everyone thinks they're like statues, but they're just regular people in funny hats." "I could definitely get a reaction." Jake laughed nervously. "Mate, I was just joking. Those guards are serious business. They're actual soldiers, not street performers, and messing with them probably isn't legal." But Marcus was already deep in planning mode. His mind was racing with possibilities. He pulled out his phone and started researching the Queen's Guard, looking for any information that might help him plan the perfect prank. What he found only fueled his confidence further. The guards were indeed real soldiers, highly trained members of the British Army's Household Division. They were responsible for protecting royal residences and had been doing so for centuries. But Marcus focused on the stories of tourists getting small reactions, a guard stepping around someone blocking their path, or occasionally speaking to move people along. He convinced himself that these were signs of weakness, proof that he could succeed where others had failed. Over the next few days, Marcus visited Buckingham Palace several times, studying the guards' routines and positions. He watched how they stood perfectly still for hours, their red tunics and tall black bearskin hats making them look like characters from a fairy tale. He observed how tourists interacted with them and how the guards responded, or rather how they didn't respond. Marcus began to develop what he thought was a foolproof plan. He would create a series of increasingly elaborate attempts to get a reaction, filming everything for his channel. He imagined the video going viral, millions of views pouring in, and his subscriber count skyrocketing. He was already thinking of titles: "I made the Queen's Guard break," or "Royal Guard loses it. You won't believe what happens next." What Marcus didn't understand was the weight of history that surrounded these guards. He saw them as props for his entertainment, not as the guardians of centuries-old traditions. He didn't know about the rigorous training they underwent, the pride they took in their duty, or the serious consequences that awaited anyone who truly crossed the line. The Queen's Guard weren't just soldiers playing dress-up for tourists. They were active military personnel with real responsibilities and real authority. Their colorful uniforms and ceremonial duties didn't diminish their role as protectors of the royal family and royal property. But Marcus saw only the spectacle, not the substance. As he planned his prank, Marcus felt invincible. He had gotten away with so many stunts before, always managing to charm his way out of trouble or simply running away when things got heated. He had been warned by security guards, chased by angry shop owners, and even questioned by police a few times. But nothing serious had ever happened. His charm, his followers, and his ability to frame everything as just content creation had always saved him. This confidence would prove to be his downfall. Marcus had no idea that his upcoming stunt would set in motion a chain of events that would not only destroy his career, but also uncover secrets about his own family that had been buried for generations. The guards he planned to mock carried with them the weight of British history, and that history was about to collide with Marcus's present in ways he could never have imagined. The night before his planned prank, Marcus sat in his apartment editing his previous videos, completely unaware that his research into the Queen's Guard had already triggered something. His internet searches, his repeated visits to the palace, and his obvious filming of the guards had not gone unnoticed. In a world where security was paramount, even small threats were taken seriously. As Marcus went to sleep that night, dreaming of viral fame and increased revenue, he had no idea that tomorrow would be the beginning of the end of life as he knew it. The royal guards he planned to humiliate had stood their post through world wars, terrorist threats, and countless challenges to the crown. They had protected secrets that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. And one of those secrets was about to destroy Marcus Thompson completely. The morning of August 15, 2023, started like any other day for Marcus Thompson. He woke up in his Camden apartment, made his usual protein shake, and checked his phone for overnight comments and messages. His follower count was steadily climbing, and the anticipation for his next big stunt was building in the comments section of his latest posts. Marcus had been teasing his audience for a week with mysterious posts about the biggest prank London has ever seen and making history at a historical place. His followers were buzzing with excitement and speculation. Some guessed he was planning something at the Tower of London. Others thought he might try to sneak into Westminster Abbey. None of them guessed the truth. After a quick workout and shower, Marcus gathered his equipment. He had invested in professional-grade camera gear over the years, and today he was bringing his best setup. A high-definition camera that could capture every detail, multiple backup recording devices, and even a small drone for aerial shots if the opportunity presented itself. He also packed some props that he thought would be hilarious: a rubber chicken, a whoopee cushion, and a fake mustache. Looking back, Marcus would later realize how childish and naive his preparations had been. He was treating one of the most serious and historically significant institutions in Britain like a playground for his amusement. The journey to Buckingham Palace took about 30 minutes on the Underground. Marcus spent the time hyping himself up and going over his plan one more time. He would start small with some basic attempts to get the guards' attention, gradually escalating his efforts until something happened. He expected to get a stern warning, maybe even be asked to leave, but he was confident he could spin any reaction into entertaining content. What Marcus didn't know was that his activities had already been flagged by palace security. His repeated visits over the past week, combined with his obvious filming equipment and research into guard schedules, had raised red flags. In the modern security environment, even seemingly harmless pranks were taken seriously, especially when they involved the royal family's protection. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell had been monitoring Marcus's activities for 3 days. A 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police with specialized training in royal protection, she had seen every type of threat imaginable, from serious terrorist plots to harmless but misguided publicity stunts. Marcus fell somewhere in between, and that made him particularly dangerous. "He's not a terrorist," she had told her team during their morning briefing, "but he's reckless and seeking attention. Those are exactly the kind of people who can inadvertently create serious security incidents." The security team had been tracking Marcus's social media posts, analyzing his previous pranks and building a profile of his behavior patterns. They knew he was planning something for today, and they were ready. Marcus arrived at Buckingham Palace around 10:30 a.m., just as the changing of the guard ceremony was ending. The area was crowded with tourists, which he thought would provide perfect cover for his stunt. He positioned himself near the fence, set up his camera equipment, and began filming what he thought would be his masterpiece. The guard he chose to target was standing at attention outside the gate, rifle in hand, looking straight ahead with the perfect stillness that had made the Queen's Guard famous worldwide. The guard was Corporal James Harrison, a decorated soldier who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before being selected for ceremonial duties. He had been standing guard for over an hour in the hot summer sun, but his discipline was absolute. Marcus started with what he considered his warm-up routine. He made funny faces at the guard, told jokes loudly enough for everyone to hear, and even did a little dance. The tourists around him laughed and pulled out their own phones to record. Marcus felt the familiar rush of performing for an audience and being the center of attention, but Corporal Harrison didn't react. He had been trained for this exact situation countless times. His job was to remain motionless and alert unless there was a genuine threat to security. or he needed to perform his duties. A foolish tourist making faces was neither. Frustrated by the lack of response, Marcus escalated his efforts. He pulled out his rubber chicken and began making ridiculous noises with it. He honked his whoopee cushion repeatedly. He even put on his fake mustache and started doing impressions of famous movie characters. The crowd was eating it up, laughing and cheering him on. Still, Corporal Harrison remained perfectly still. This was when Marcus made his first serious mistake. Emboldened by the crowd's reaction and frustrated by the guard's discipline, he stepped closer to the fence. Much closer than was appropriate or allowed. He was now within arm's reach of the guard, filming just inches from the soldier's face. "Come on, mate," Marcus called out loudly. "Just give us a little smile, just a tiny reaction. Your mom's probably watching this on YouTube." The crowd laughed, but something had changed. Other guards had noticed the disturbance and palace security personnel were moving into position. What had started as a harmless tourist interaction was now becoming a potential security incident. Marcus, high on adrenaline and audience attention, didn't notice the subtle changes happening around him. He was focused entirely on getting a reaction from Corporal Harrison, convinced that he just needed to try harder, be more creative, push a little further. That's when he crossed the line that would change everything. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out what he thought was his secret weapon, a small remote-controlled toy helicopter that made annoying buzzing sounds. He had used it in previous pranks to great effect. His plan was to fly it around the guard's head, creating a distraction that would surely break the soldier's concentration. But as Marcus activated the toy and it began buzzing around Corporal Harrison's head, alarms began going off in the palace security center. The small flying object had been detected by advanced security systems, and in a post-9/11 world where drones and other flying devices posed potential threats, protocols were immediately activated. Within seconds, Marcus found himself surrounded by armed police officers. The toy helicopter clattered to the ground as multiple voices shouted commands at him. The crowd that had been laughing and cheering moments before was now backing away in fear and confusion. "Put your hands where we can see them. Do not move." Marcus's heart was pounding as he realized that what he had thought was harmless fun had suddenly become very serious indeed. But even as police officers moved to detain him, he had no idea how serious things were about to become. The toy helicopter incident had triggered a full security protocol, but more importantly, it had caused Marcus's identity to be run through every database the British government had access to. And that search was about to uncover something that had been hidden for over 80 years, something that connected Marcus Thompson to the royal family in ways that would shock everyone involved. The holding cell at Belgravia police station was nothing like the glamorous trouble Marcus had imagined getting into. The gray walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and smell of disinfectant were a far cry from the exciting content he had planned to create. As he sat on the hard bench, still wearing his designer clothes that now felt ridiculous in this setting, Marcus began to understand that this wasn't just another adventure he could laugh about later. It had been 4 hours since his arrest at Buckingham Palace, and no one would tell him anything beyond the basic charges: breach of public order, trespassing on royal property, and something called suspicious activity near a protected site. The last charge worried him the most because he had no idea what it meant or how serious it might be. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell entered the interview room at exactly 3:47 p.m., carrying a thick file that seemed far too large for a simple prank gone wrong. She was accompanied by another officer Marcus didn't recognize, a stern-looking man in an expensive suit who introduced himself only as Mr. Davies from the Home Office. Marcus had been through police interviews before, usually for minor disturbances related to his pranks. He knew the routine and had always managed to charm his way out with a combination of apologies, explanations about content creation, and promises to be more careful in the future. But something felt different about this situation. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Inspector Mitchell began, settling into her chair across from him. "Do you understand why you're here?" Marcus tried his usual approach, flashing his most winning smile. "Look, I know I got a bit carried away today, but it was just a harmless prank. I'm a content creator. My followers expect this kind of thing from me. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone or cause any real trouble." Mr. Davies leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mr. Thompson, this stopped being about a simple prank the moment you deployed an unidentified flying device near one of the most secure locations in Britain. In today's security environment, such actions trigger protocols that go far beyond local policing. The word protocols sent a chill down Marcus's spine. This was starting to sound much more serious than he had anticipated. It was just a toy helicopter, Marcus protested. You can buy them at any shop for £20. I wasn't trying to spy on anyone or cause any security threats. Detective Inspector Mitchell opened her file and pulled out several photographs. They were surveillance photos of Marcus from his visits to Buckingham Palace over the past week. The images showed him clearly studying the guards, taking notes, and positioning his camera equipment. We've been monitoring your activities for several days. Mr. Thompson, your behavior pattern suggested you were planning something and today confirmed our concerns. But that's not why Mr. Davies is here. Marcus looked confused. What do you mean? Mr. Davies took over the conversation. When you were detained, we ran your personal information through our security databases as standard procedure. What we found was unexpected. He pulled out another set of documents from the file. These looked older, some of them appearing to be photocopies of historical records. Mr. Thompson, what do you know about your family history? Specifically, your grandfather's background? Marcus was completely confused now. My grandfather? What does he have to do with anything? He died when I was 12. He was just a regular guy, worked in a factory, lived a quiet life. His name was William Thompson, correct? Yes, but I don't understand what this has to do with my prank today. Mr. Davies exchanged a look with Detective Inspector Mitchell before continuing. Mr. Thompson, your grandfather wasn't just a factory worker. According to records we've uncovered, he was involved in a significant incident during World War II, an incident that was classified at the highest levels and has remained secret for over 80 years. Marcus felt like the room was spinning. That's impossible. Grandpa Will never even talked about the war. He said he was too young to serve and spent the war working in munitions factories. That's what he told everyone, Mr. Davies said, his voice gentler now. But the truth is quite different. In 1943, your grandfather was an 18-year-old member of the King's Guard. He was stationed at Buckingham Palace during some of the most dangerous periods of the war. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His grandfather, the quiet man who had taught him to fish and always had butterscotch candies in his pockets, had been a royal guard, the same type of guard Marcus had just been mocking and humiliating. There's more, Mr. Davies continued. In December 1943, your grandfather was involved in preventing what could have been one of the most devastating security breaches in royal history. A Nazi spy had infiltrated the palace staff and was planning to assassinate King George VI during a private family dinner. Marcus sat in stunned silence as Mr. Davies continued to reveal details that completely shattered his understanding of his own family. Your grandfather discovered the plot purely by accident when he witnessed the spy tampering with the king's private dining room. Instead of raising an alarm that might have warned other conspirators, he made a split-second decision to handle the situation himself. He confronted the spy directly, leading to a struggle that ended with the spy's death. The room fell silent as Marcus tried to process this information. His grandfather, a war hero, a man who had saved the king's life. It seemed impossible to reconcile with the gentle, quiet man he had known. The incident was classified because the government didn't want to cause panic about palace security during wartime. Detective Inspector Mitchell explained. Your grandfather was sworn to secrecy and was quietly transferred to other duties. He was given a commendation that he could never talk about and a pension that he could never explain to his family. Mr. Davies pulled out one final document, a black and white photograph that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. It showed a young man in a guard's uniform standing at attention outside Buckingham Palace. The face was unmistakably his grandfather's, but decades younger than Marcus had ever seen him. This photograph was taken 3 days after the incident, Mr. Davies explained. Your grandfather continued his service with distinction until the end of the war, but he never spoke about what he had done. He carried that secret until his death. Marcus stared at the photograph, seeing his grandfather in a completely new light. The man he had thought of as ordinary had actually been extraordinary. The quiet factory worker had once been a hero who had saved the royal family, and today, Marcus had spent his morning mocking and humiliating the very institution his grandfather had served with honor and sacrifice. The irony was crushing. Marcus seeking fame and attention through disrespecting the royal guards. was the grandson of a man who had embodied everything those guards represented: duty, honor, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty to the crown. "We thought you should know," Mr. Davies said quietly. "Before we proceed with the charges against you, we wanted you to understand the full context of your actions today." Marcus put his head in his hands, finally understanding that history hadn't just hit back at him. It had completely destroyed everything he thought he knew about himself and his family. The guards he had mocked weren't just ceremonial figures or tourist attractions. They were the inheritors of a tradition that his own grandfather had honored with his life, and now Marcus had to face the consequences of his actions while carrying the weight of this devastating knowledge about his family's hidden history. The next 24 hours in custody gave Marcus plenty of time to think about everything Mr. Davies had revealed. He lay on the narrow bed in his cell, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the grandfather he had known with the war hero he had just learned about. Every memory of Grandpa Will now carried new weight and meaning. Marcus remembered how his grandfather had always stood perfectly straight, even in his old age. How he had been obsessed with punctuality and keeping his word. How he had never talked about the war, always changing the subject when Marcus asked about it as a child. Now these quirks made perfect sense. They were the habits of a soldier who had carried military discipline throughout his entire life. The most painful memory was from Marcus's 16th birthday. His grandfather had given him a small wrapped box that contained an old medal. "This belonged to someone very brave," Grandpa Will had said. "Someone who understood that real courage isn't about showing off or getting attention. It's about doing the right thing when nobody's watching, even when it costs you everything." Marcus had barely looked at the medal, dismissing it as some old military decoration his grandfather had probably bought at a flea market. He had tossed it into a drawer and forgotten about it. Now he realized that medal had probably been his grandfather's own commendation, the one he could never explain or talk about publicly. At 9 a.m. the next morning, Marcus was brought back to the interview room. Detective Inspector Mitchell and Mr. Davies were waiting for him, along with someone new, an elderly woman in her 70s with kind eyes and an unmistakably upper-class accent. "Mr. Thompson," Mr. Davies said, "I'd like you to meet Lady Margaret Fitzwilliam. She was a lady-in-waiting to the Queen Mother during the war years, and she has something she'd like to tell you about your grandfather." Lady Margaret smiled warmly at Marcus, but her expression was serious. "Mr. Thompson, I was 22 years old in December 1943, and I was present in the palace on the night your grandfather saved the king's life." Marcus listened in stunned silence as Lady Margaret recounted the events of that night in vivid detail. "I was helping prepare the private dining room when I heard a commotion in the hallway. There was a struggle, some shouting, and then silence. A few minutes later, your grandfather appeared at the dining room door. His uniform was torn, there was blood on his hands, and he looked absolutely exhausted." She paused, her eyes growing distant as she recalled the memory. "He simply said, 'Ma'am, there was an intruder. The situation has been handled.' Then he stood at attention while security personnel removed a body from the service corridor. We learned later that the man was a Nazi agent who had been planning to poison the king's evening tea." Marcus felt sick to his stomach, not just because of the dramatic story, but because of what his actions the previous day now represented in this context. "Your grandfather could have raised an alarm," Lady Margaret continued. "He could have called for help and let others handle the situation. But he knew that any delay might give the spy time to complete his mission or alert other conspirators, so he acted alone, knowing it might cost him his life." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. "I kept a diary during the war years, and I wrote about that night. Would you like me to read what I wrote about your grandfather?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak. Lady Margaret opened the journal to a page marked with a ribbon and read in her clear, aristocratic voice, "December 18th, 1943. Tonight I witnessed true heroism. A young guardsman, barely older than myself, saved not just His Majesty's life but potentially the entire course of the war. He asked for nothing, wanted no recognition, and when offered a transfer to safer duties he requested to remain at his post. He said his duty was to protect the royal family, and he would not abandon that duty while there was still danger. I have never seen such courage in someone so young. Tears were streaming down Marcus's face as he listened to the words written about his grandfather over 80 years ago. This was the same man who had taught him to ride a bicycle, who had made him pancakes on Sunday mornings, who had quietly lived a humble life while carrying the secret of his extraordinary courage. "There's something else," Mr. Davies said, pulling out another document. "After the war, your grandfather was offered several opportunities for advancement and recognition. He could have had a military career, a position in the civil service, even a recommendation for a civilian honor that could be made public. He turned them all down. Why?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because he wanted a normal life," Lady Margaret answered. "He told the palace administrators that he had done his duty, and now he wanted to go home, find a job, and raise a family in peace. He said the real reward for his service would be knowing that his children and grandchildren could grow up in a free Britain." The weight of this revelation was crushing Marcus. His grandfather had given up fame, recognition, and career advancement to live quietly and provide for his family. Meanwhile, Marcus had built his entire life around seeking attention, fame, and recognition, often through disrespecting the very things his grandfather had held sacred. Detective Inspector Mitchell leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, the reason we're telling you all this isn't just to make you feel guilty. It's because we want you to understand the full consequences of your actions." She opened a folder and showed Marcus several documents. "Your stunt yesterday was filmed by dozens of tourists and posted on social media within minutes. The videos have already gone viral, but not in the way you intended. People aren't laughing at your humor. They're outraged by your disrespect toward the guards." Marcus looked at the social media screenshots she showed him. The comments were brutal. People were calling him everything from disrespectful, idiot to national embarrassment. His follower count was dropping rapidly as people unsubscribed from his channels in disgust. "But that's not the worst part," Mr. Davies added. "Some investigative journalists have started digging into your background after your arrest made the news. It's only a matter of time before they uncover your grandfather's war service." Marcus felt his heart sink even further. "What does that mean?" Lady Margaret answered gently but firmly. "It means that your grandfather's sacrifice and heroism will become public knowledge, but it will be forever linked to your shameful behavior yesterday. Instead of being remembered as a hero, he'll be remembered as the hero whose grandson mocked the very institution he died protecting." The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had not only disgraced himself, he had potentially tarnished his grandfather's legacy forever. The secret that Grandpa Will had kept to protect his family's privacy and safety was about to be exposed because of Marcus's reckless pursuit of internet fame. "However," Mr. Davies said, his tone suggesting there might be hope, "there may be a way to prevent that from happening, but it will require you to make some very difficult choices about your future." Marcus looked up, desperate to hear any option that might help him fix the disaster he had created. He was about to learn that redemption would be possible, but it would cost him everything he had built his life around. Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair and studied Marcus carefully before speaking. "Mr. Thompson, what I'm about to propose is unprecedented, but given the unique circumstances of your case, it may be the only way to resolve this situation with dignity for everyone involved." Marcus waited anxiously, knowing that whatever came next would determine not just his own future, but how his grandfather's memory would be preserved. "The palace has been in discussions about your case at the highest levels," Mr. Davies continued. "There's genuine concern about how to handle this situation. On one hand, your actions yesterday were serious enough to warrant significant legal consequences. On the other hand, your grandfather's service record and sacrifice create a complex moral situation." Lady Margaret nodded in agreement. "His Majesty himself has been briefed on your grandfather's heroism. While he is understandably disappointed by your actions, he also recognizes the debt the royal family owes to your grandfather's memory." Marcus felt a glimmer of hope but was afraid to let himself believe that things might work out. "Here's what we're prepared to offer," Mr. Davies said, pulling out a formal-looking document. "In exchange for your agreement to certain conditions, we will not pursue the most serious charges against you, and we will work to ensure that your grandfather's wartime service remains classified." "What conditions?" Marcus asked immediately. Detective Inspector Mitchell took over the explanation. "First, you must publicly apologize for your actions not just to the guards you disrespected, but to all serving military personnel and their families. This apology must be sincere, detailed, and posted on all your social media platforms. Marcus nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. I can do that. Second, she continued, you must permanently shut down all your social media accounts related to prank content. No more YouTube channel, no more Instagram stunts, no more TikTok pranks. Your career as a content creator who profits from disrespecting people and institutions is over. This hit Marcus harder than he expected. His entire livelihood was built around his online presence. Without his channels, he would have no income, no career, no identity as he had known it for years. But given everything he had learned about his grandfather, he knew he couldn't continue that path anyway. Third, Mr. Davies added, you must perform 200 hours of community service, specifically working with veterans organizations. You need to understand firsthand the sacrifice and service that people like your grandfather gave for this country. And finally, Lady Margaret said, her voice gentle but firm, you must write a letter of apology directly to Corporal Harrison, the guard you targeted yesterday. You need to understand that he's not a tourist attraction or a prop for entertainment. He's a serving soldier who deserves respect. Marcus looked at all three of them, then down at the document in front of him. The conditions were severe, but they were also fair. More importantly, they offered him a chance to honor his grandfather's memory, rather than destroy it. There's one more thing, Mr. Davies said. If you agree to these conditions, Lady Margaret has offered to arrange something special for you. Lady Margaret smiled. I've spoken with the palace, and if you complete your community service successfully and demonstrate genuine change in your behavior, we can arrange for you to meet some of the current guards, not as a content creator or prankster, but as William Thompson's grandson. They can tell you stories about the traditions your grandfather helped protect. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes again. The opportunity to connect with his grandfather's legacy in a meaningful way was more valuable than any viral video could ever be. I'll do it, Marcus said without hesitation. All of it. I'll meet whatever conditions you set. Mr. Davies slid the document across the table. Read it carefully before you sign. Once you agree to this, there's no going back. If you violate any of these terms, the full charges will be reinstated, and your grandfather's story will likely become public in the worst possible way. Marcus read through the document carefully. It was essentially a contract to completely change his life. He would have to find a new career, build a new identity, and learn to live without the constant validation of social media followers. It was terrifying, but it also felt like a chance to become someone his grandfather could have been proud of. As he signed the document, Marcus thought about the medal his grandfather had given him on his 16th birthday. As soon as he got out of custody, he would find it and learn what it really meant. He would research his grandfather's service properly, with respect and reverence instead of ignorance. There's something else I think you should know, Lady Margaret said as Marcus finished signing. Your grandfather did talk about you, you know. Marcus looked up in surprise. I stayed in touch with him occasionally over the years. Christmas cards, the occasional phone call. In his later years, he mentioned having a grandson who was always making people laugh, always looking for attention. He worried about you, actually. He worried about me? He said you had so much energy and creativity, but he was afraid you might use it in ways that could hurt yourself or others. He wished he could guide you, but he said he didn't know how. To explain the importance of service and duty to someone who had grown up in a world where those concepts seemed old-fashioned. Marcus felt a deep ache in his chest. His grandfather had understood his struggles and had wanted to help him, but had been held back by the very secrets that were now coming to light. He would be proud of the choice you're making today, Lady Margaret said kindly. Admitting mistakes and choosing to change course takes real courage. It's exactly what he would have done. As Marcus was released from custody that afternoon, he felt like a completely different person than the one who had woken up yesterday morning planning a prank. He had lost his career, his online identity, and his understanding of his own family history. But he had gained something much more valuable, a chance to build a life based on honor instead of attention-seeking. The road ahead would be difficult. He would have to find legitimate work, learn to live without social media validation, and figure out who Marcus Thompson really was beneath all the performative nonsense. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. The first thing he did when he got home was search through his old bedroom until he found the drawer where he had tossed his grandfather's medal years ago. When he finally found it and held it in his hands, he could see that it was inscribed, with words he had never bothered to read before. For exceptional courage and service to the Crown, W.T. 1943. Marcus sat on his bed holding the medal and thinking about everything that had happened. Tomorrow he would begin writing his public apology. He would start the process of shutting down his social media accounts and saying goodbye to the life he had built around seeking attention and validation from strangers. But tonight, he wanted to do something his grandfather would have appreciated. He wanted to research the Queen's Guard properly, not looking for weaknesses to exploit, but trying to understand the history and tradition that Grandpa Will had been part of. He wanted to learn about the men and women who had stood those posts over the centuries, protecting not just buildings and people, but the very idea of duty and service. As Marcus began his research, he started to understand that his grandfather's story wasn't unique in its heroism. It was unique only in its secrecy. The guards he had mocked yesterday were part of a tradition filled with ordinary people who had done extraordinary things, often without recognition or reward. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Thompson felt genuinely ashamed of his actions. But more importantly, he felt motivated to become someone worthy of his grandfather's legacy. The road to redemption would be long and difficult, but at least now he knew which direction to walk. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood outside the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, wearing a simple black suit and carrying a small wreath of poppies. It was Remembrance Day, and he was attending his first veterans ceremony since beginning his community service. The transformation in his life had been more dramatic than anyone could have predicted, including himself. The months following his arrest had been the most challenging of his life. Shutting down his social media accounts had felt like losing his identity completely. For years, his worth had been measured in likes, shares, and subscriber counts. Without that constant validation, Marcus had struggled to understand who he really was. The financial impact had been immediate and severe. Without his content creation income, Marcus had been forced to sell his flashy sports car, give up his expensive Camden apartment, and move into a small flat in South London. He had taken a job working at a local community center, helping elderly residents with basic technology needs. It paid barely enough to cover his basic expenses, but it had taught him something invaluable about genuine service to others. His community service with veterans organizations had been eye-opening in ways he never expected. He had spent countless hours listening to stories from men and women who had served their country in conflicts around the world. Their tales of sacrifice, loss, and quiet heroism had gradually helped him understand what his grandfather's generation had experienced. One of the veterans he had grown closest to was Frank Morrison, an 85-year-old former guardsman who had served in the 1960s. Frank had known some of the guards who had served alongside Marcus's grandfather during the war, and through him, Marcus had learned more details about his grandfather's service. "Your granddad was legendary among the guards," Frank had told him one afternoon as they sorted through old photographs at the Veterans Center. Not because of what happened that night with the spy. Most of us didn't know about that until recently. But because of how he carried himself every day. He never complained, never asked for special treatment, and he looked out for the younger guards like they were his own brothers. These stories had helped Marcus understand that his grandfather's heroism wasn't just about one dramatic night in 1943. It was about a lifetime of quiet service, putting others before himself and carrying his responsibilities with dignity. The public apology Marcus had posted 6 months ago had gone viral in ways his pranks never had. Instead of seeking attention through disrespect, his genuine remorse and detailed explanation of his grandfather's war service had touched millions of people. Comments poured in from military families, veterans, and ordinary citizens who appreciated his honesty and commitment to change. But the real validation had come 3 months ago when Corporal James Harrison, the guard Marcus had targeted at Buckingham Palace, had agreed to meet with him. The meeting had taken place at a quiet cafe near Hyde Park. Marcus had expected anger or coldness from the soldier he had humiliated, but instead found a thoughtful man only a few years older than himself, who was genuinely interested in Marcus's journey toward redemption. "I won't lie," Corporal Harrison had said over coffee. "What you did that day was infuriating, not just because of the disrespect, but because you treated our service like it was a joke. But learning about your grandfather's history changed my perspective completely, Corporal." Harrison had then shared something that had moved Marcus to tears. "After I learned about William Thompson's service record, I requested to research some of the other guards from that era. Your grandfather wasn't the only hero. There were dozens of incidents during the war where guards prevented security breaches, protected royal family members, and even saved civilian lives during bombing raids. Most of these stories were never made public." He had pulled out a folder filled with historical documents and photographs. "Your grandfather was part of something much bigger than any individual act of heroism. He was part of a tradition of ordinary people doing extraordinary things because it was their duty. That's what we're still carrying on today." Now, standing at the Remembrance Day ceremony, Marcus watched as elderly veterans laid wreaths at the memorial. Many of them moved slowly, their bodies weakened by age and the lingering effects of their service, but their dignity and pride were unmistakable. Lady Margaret Fitzwilliam appeared beside him, looking elegant despite her advanced age. "How are you feeling, Marcus?" she asked kindly. "Different," he answered honestly. 6 months ago, I thought success meant getting millions of people to watch me do something stupid. Now I think success might mean helping one person feel less alone." Lady Margaret smiled. "That sounds like something your grandfather might have said." As the ceremony concluded, Marcus noticed a small group of current Queen's Guards in their dress uniforms laying a special wreath. One of them was Corporal Harrison, who caught Marcus's eye and nodded respectfully. After the formal ceremony ended, Marcus approached the memorial and placed his own small wreath, one he had made himself using flowers from his grandfather's favorite garden center. The card attached simply read, "For Grandpa Will, who taught me that real courage doesn't seek applause. From your grandson, who is finally learning to listen." As Marcus walked away from the memorial, he thought about the future he was building. He had started taking evening classes in social work, hoping to eventually help other young people who were struggling to find purpose and direction. He was also volunteering to speak at schools about the dangers of seeking validation through social media and the importance of understanding history and tradition. The viral fame he had once craved now seemed hollow and meaningless. Instead, he was building something much more valuable, a life based on service, respect, and genuine connection with others. His phone buzzed with a text message from Frank Morrison. "Saw you on the news at the ceremony today. Your granddad would be proud. See you at the center tomorrow?" Marcus smiled as he typed back, "Wouldn't miss it. Thank you for everything." As he walked through London toward his small flat, Marcus realized that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Not fame or attention from strangers, but a sense of purpose and connection to something larger than himself. He had learned to honor the past while building a better future. The guards at Buckingham Palace continued their ancient duties, protecting traditions that men like his grandfather had died to preserve. And now, for the first time in his life, Marcus Thompson understood what it truly meant to serve something greater than yourself. The history that had hit back at him so forcefully had ultimately saved him from a life of meaningless pursuits and shallow achievements. In losing everything he thought mattered, Marcus had found everything that actually did.